first thing to say is thank you to EFELA, thank you to ELI, to everyone involved in organising this conference. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be here. It's really, really lovely. Now, I suppose I'm here amongst lawyers, engineers, so I think at this point in time I'm just going to give you a little bit of background for me. So how I like to describe my background is I'm a reformed lawyer, a recovering academic, and someone who has a research qualification in the regulation of wind. So make of that what you will. I work for Solar Ireland, who are a trade association with approximately 140 members spanning, I suppose, the entire solar value chain. So that is manufacturing, to developers, to installers, to everything in between. Now, our vision, in line with the presentation that Fanny just gave, is to have full decarbonisation of Ireland's electricity system. So I'm going to ask you a question. Why don't Irish solar panels ever get tired? Does anyone want to hazard an answer? Guys, you're very quiet. You're not in the least bit brave this morning. So the answer is, or the answer I got was because they never do any overtime. Okay, so this is, you'll get a lot of questions and jokes like this if you work in the solar sector in a country that's famous for its wind and rain, but not well known for solar. But what's really, really great is, I suppose, we do have a solar sector. And the solar sector in Ireland is surprising. And it's mainly surprising to the Irish people. And we have it largely because of EU regulation. And that's thanks to, I suppose, it's thanks to the 2030 targets. It's thanks to the 2050 targets. And I'm very excited that we may also shortly have 2040 targets. And one of the things that was mentioned, I suppose, in the recent policy debates at European level was a wish to have, I think it's 39% of our energy demand supplied by solar. So as a person working in the Irish solar sector, I'm looking forward to advocating for us to have 18 gigawatts of solar by 2030. But before I speak about, what we're going to do going forward and the future, I think it's helpful to look at where we are and what brought us to that. So if you look at Ireland's solar sector, it's driven by EU policies and laws, many of which Fanny mentioned. So one of the key ones is, I suppose, you had your European Green Deal. This triggered your EU solar energy strategy, and that did 5 really great things. So it mandated the deployment of solar on different categories of buildings between now and 2030. It proposed rules for accelerated permitting timelines, so that's for grid and for planning. And if you're talking about small-scale rooftop solar, it's between 1 and 3 months, depending on the size of the system. If you're talking about ground-mounted solar, it's between 1 and 2 years, depending on location. The third thing it did was it initiated schemes to increase European solar manufacturing, and that later led to the NZIA and rules that we're currently implementing. It created a skills partnership, and it initiated schemes to support small producers, the energy poor, and communities. So if you look on the slide, you can see Ireland's current targets. So we have 2 plans, one of which everyone here will be familiar with because we have them across Europe. That's your National Energy and Climate Plan. The other one people will be less familiar with, unless you're from Ireland. Has anyone here been to Ireland? Cool, okay, so it's actually quite a few. So you guys will probably know this, but we have this inward-facing plan called a Climate Action Plan. So in those plans, Ireland set out certain targets for 2030. Bear in mind, we're a very small country. So what we're hoping to do is by 2030 to have 80% renewable electricity, and that's to be made up of different things. So solar, we're hoping to hit 8 gigawatts, and we're currently on target to reach that and exceed it, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We're hoping to have onshore wind, 5 gigawatts, offshore wind, at least 5 gigawatts, and this is to be supported by flexible gas plants and demand-side flexibility. So that's kind of the overarching plan for 2030. How does this compare? Now, anytime I hear the word compare, I think of Sinead O'Connor. I don't know about you guys. But if you're looking at it and you're going, where have we come from? Where are we going to? In 2023, we had a certain amount of solar. So at EU level, Solar Power Europe, they said that we had 363 gigawatts. Roughly, that was at the end of 2023. We now have, at the end of 2025, we're going to have 402 gigawatts. So that's an increase of 1.5, that's an increase of 1.5. So it's pretty big. Now, if you look at where Ireland was in this, before you had the solar energy strategy, we were number 17. So if you look through that, that graph there. Now we're after Lithuania, we're after Austria, and we're after Sweden. And one of the things that prompted Ireland to change and to develop our solar sector was this EU solar strategy. So what that did was we had these, at the time we had indicative targets for solar, but I don't think anyone was very hopeful about them. It was to have 1.5 to 2.5 gigawatts by 2030. They then became legal. They got a legal underpinning, and that was as a result of the discussions around the solar strategy. And subsequently, those targets got more ambitious. So they became 8 gigawatts with a legal underpinning by 2030. So if you look at where we came from, it's actually really, really cool to be working in the sector in Ireland. So on the slide there, you can see that's the first utility scale solar farm in Ireland, which was energised in 2022. So that's just 3 years ago. So we've moved quite a distance from that. And that sheep is three-legged. If anyone's looking at it, that's actually a real thing. That's a three-legged sheep grazing around the panels, showing the dual land use that's possible with solar farms. So you move from the 2022 to 2025, where we did this report and we looked at how much solar have we now. So we have 1,767 megawatts of solar energised as of June. Now that spans from your solar farms that folks will be used to seeing, to your rooftop solar, all the way to your auto production, where people use and consume the energy themselves. And what's really nice about this is about a third of this is rooftop solar. Now, for anyone who's travelled around Ireland, you can see the top producing counties, and unsurprisingly, they're in the east. So that was for May, so my figures are a little bit old. I meant to update the slides and forgot, so my apologies. But you can see it's Meath, which in Ireland used to be the homes of the Celtic kings and queens, followed by Wexford and followed by Kildare. Now, if you want to look at rooftop solar and who's putting solar on their rooftops in Ireland, not surprisingly, it starts with Dublin, the capital. After that comes Cork, my home county, and at the very bottom is Longford. And one of the things that we're working towards in Solar Ireland is trying to increase, trying to help those who are energy poor or below a certain income level to actually access rooftop solar. Because if you look at those counties, the ones who are actually accessing the grants, accessing supports, and getting into, becoming part of the energy solution, tend to be in higher income per capita counties. So that's a work stream that we're advocating for with the government. Freeze the grant, make grants more accessible to those who are energy poor or below a certain income line. So we've come a journey in Ireland from 2022 to 2024. Small sector, doing well. It's moved from being niche to being priority and being seen as a key part of Ireland's electricity mix. Now, I've got a lot of stuff on the slide. I'm not going to do it to you guys. I'm going to mention 3 things, but anyone who's curious about anything else in the slide, if you've got questions or if you want to find me during coffee. So the 3 things, that have helped, or 3 milestones in Ireland moving in 2022 to 2024, from this being a niche technology to being a priority, were, the targets that increased to 8 gigawatts. And that process started at the end of 2022, and it was helped by the solar energy strategy, which moved it forward. The second thing was in March 2024, lovely milestone for the solar sector. We joined the Solar Gigawatt Club. Now, this will mean nothing, I'd say, to anyone else here, but for Ireland, this was a massive milestone. It meant that we went over a gigawatt. We joined the countries who have that on their energy base. People from Germany, Spain, Italy, this will not be a big deal to you, but it gave a lot of momentum to the sector in Ireland. It encouraged investors. It showed that the sector could deliver and that it was delivering and the framework was working well. In July, Ireland, we had over 100,000 rooftops connected to the grid, and that also was a milestone. It was one of the things that people were very proud of. So moving forward, what do we need between now and 2030 to continue this journey for solar in Ireland? Again, lots of things on the slides. I'm going to mention 3. So there are 3 things that we think will really help the solar sector in Ireland moving to 2030. The first is ensuring that we get approval of new state-supported renewable energy auctions. The government have applied to the EU for an extension, and they need to put a scheme in place to introduce the requirements of the Net Zero Industry Act. They've pledged, they've told publicly, they've said we will have auctions between now and 2030. The industry is waiting just to see that framework and for that to be developed. And that'll be important for utility scale solar going forward. The second thing we need is the introduction of a framework for privately owned electricity lines. Now I'm conscious, I mentioned this yesterday, for some member states it won't be a solution. For Ireland, industry and the government think that it could be, and I'm conscious that in other member states, in Serbia as well, it might be a solution there. The third thing is we need a hybrids policy. So at the moment you can co-locate different technologies in Ireland. So you can have storage, you can have wind, you can have solar co-located, but you can't have a hybrid unit. So what I mean by that is you can't have these technologies dynamically sharing that electricity behind the same connection point. So the government are developing that framework, and we're hoping to have that very, very shortly. So those are the 3 things that we think we need for 2030, and that gets to the exciting bit, where you're talking about 2040, what's next? So I'm conscious that we have proposed targets for 2040 broadly for the European region. I would like to advocate for Ireland to have an increased solar target of 18 gigawatts by 2040. And to achieve this, I think that we can actually utilise AI in a wonderful way. Now, I'm conscious that yesterday folks spoke about AI in the context of data centres. And as you'll know, I think there's about 80 data centres in Ireland. There's many more gone into planning. There's a huge demand of the electricity, of our electricity supply is from data centres. I'm not going to talk about that because that is one that's complex and we've had experts working it through yesterday. What I'm talking about is how AI can contribute or can actually help the energy sector or help solar. Because I think with the right regulation and looking at energy efficiency and how we use it, it could actually be a very strong solution. So this, I'm looking at the good news story, and I'm following on from Fanny saying there are good news stories. This is one I'm looking at it. So there's a couple of different things that AI could really help with, and I'm conscious that our system operator in Ireland is pretty strong on these things, and they're working and they're looking into this and researching. So the first is grid management practices, and I'm talking about supporting real-life supply-demand, balancing, and particularly coordinating, the management of distribution systems as we have more and more of this rooftop solar coming onto the system. The second is forecasting and dispatch, increasing your accuracy of predictions for grid maintenance. And the third is operations and maintenance of solar farms. So using AI to schedule these things in clever ways I won't even have thought of, and also drones and things like that. Your fourth one is the one that lawyers tend to get very excited about. And you see a lot of talk about this at conferences, which is energy market participation by smart contracting. So having automatic trading, having 24/7 carbon-free PPAs, and dynamic energy pricing. So I think most folk here will have been at conferences where people were talking about this and rubbing their hands and getting very excited because it's a lawyer's dream. So that's the one I'm going to leave you with, and I'm just going to say thank you very, very much for your attention. And if anyone has any questions on anything, just find me during the coffee break. Thanks.